I've always loved mornings. There's something about the quiet hum of the house waking up, the coffee maker gurgling, the faint chirping of birds outside, the way the sunlight spills across the hardwood floors of our little home on Maple Street. Emily and I had built a life here, a steady rhythm that felt like it could go on forever. That morning, I was at the stove, flipping pancakes, the kind with extra cinnamon because she'd once said they reminded her of her grandma's kitchen. The spatula felt good in my hand, solid, like I was in control of something simple and true. I could hear her moving upstairs, the soft creak of the floorboards as she got ready for work. She was a graphic designer, freelancing mostly, which meant her hours were erratic, but I liked that. It gave our days a kind of loose, comfortable chaos. When she came down, her auburn hair was still damp from the shower, catching the light in a way that made me pause mid-flip. She smiled at me, that quick, easy smile I'd fallen for years ago, and leaned in to kiss my cheek. "Smells amazing, Mark," she said, her voice warm but a little distracted. I didn't think much of it then. She was always juggling deadlines, and I figured she was just mentally sorting through her day. She grabbed her coffee, black with a splash of cream, and perched on the stool by the counter, scrolling through her phone. I plated the pancakes and slid them over to her, watching as she absently picked at the edges, her eyes flicking to the screen every few seconds. Text, maybe. Client. That's what I told myself. We'd been married 5 years, together for 8, and I thought I knew her like the back of my hand. The way she'd hum off-key when she was happy, the little wrinkle between her brows when she was stressed, the way she'd curl into me on the couch after a long day. Our life wasn't perfect, whose is? But it was ours. I worked as a mechanic, steady hours at the shop downtown, and I liked coming home to her, to this. The pancakes were a small thing, a gesture, but they were part of the glue that held us together. Or so I thought. That morning, as she ate in silence, I didn't notice the slight tremble in her fingers when she set her mug down, or the way she avoided my gaze when I asked about her plans. "Just errands," she said, vague as ever. "Maybe a meeting later." I nodded, trusting her, because why wouldn't I? The day unfolded like any other. I headed to the shop, got grease under my nails fixing a busted transmission, traded dumb jokes with the guys over lunch. When I got home, Emily wasn't there. Errands, I figured, and I didn't mind. I liked the quiet sometimes. I grilled a burger for myself, watched some game highlights, and waited for her to breeze back in with that smile. She did, eventually, around 8, her cheeks flushed like she'd been rushing. "Busy day?" I asked, and she nodded, kicking off her shoes. "Yeah, just running around." She kissed me again, quick and light, and headed upstairs to unwind. I didn't follow her. I should have, maybe, but I didn't. Instead, I sat there, the TV flickering, the house settling into its nighttime hush, and I felt content. That's the word for it. Content. Looking back, I wonder how I missed it. The cracks in the rhythm, the offbeat notes in her voice. But that's the thing about trust. It blinds you until it doesn't. Days turned into weeks, and I started noticing things. Little things at first, like how Emily's phone was always face down now, or how she'd take calls in the other room, her voice low and clipped. She'd always been private about her work. Creative types are like that, I told myself, but this felt different. She'd come home later some nights, her hair a little messier, her excuses a little thinner. "Client ran long," she'd say, or, "I stopped by the store." I'd nod, because what else was I supposed to do? Accuse her of lying over a trip to the grocery store? I wasn't that guy. I didn't want to be. One Thursday, though, something shifted. I'd gotten off early. Slow day at the shop, and decided to surprise her with dinner. Nothing fancy, just her favorite lasagna, the kind with extra ricotta because she loved the creamy layers. I stopped by the butcher on Main Street, Greg's place, to pick up some ground beef. Greg was a big guy, burly, with a loud laugh and a habit of oversharing about his life. "Hey, Mark," he boomed when I walked in, wiping his hands on his apron. "How's the wife?" I grinned, said she was good, and ordered a pound of the lean stuff. He chatted me up while he wrapped it, something about a new recipe he'd tried, but I wasn't really listening. I was thinking about Emily's face when she'd see the lasagna, how her eyes would light up. When I got home, she wasn't there. No big deal. She was probably out on one of those errands. I started cooking, the kitchen filling with the smell of garlic and tomato sauce. Hours passed, though, and she didn't show. By 9, the lasagna was cold on the counter, and I was pacing. I texted her. Asterisk, where you at? Made dinner. Asterisk, no reply. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed. Asterisk, sorry, got caught up. Be home soon. Asterisk, I stared at the words, a weird knot forming in my gut. Caught up with what? I didn't ask. I just waited, reheating the food when I heard her car pull in at 10:30. She walked in, her coat slung over her arm, smelling faintly of something. Not perfume, not sweat, but something earthy, almost metallic. Hey, she said, smiling that distracted smile. Smells great in here. We ate in near silence. She picked at the lasagna, said it was delicious, but her mind was somewhere else. I asked about her day and she shrugged. Just stuff. You know, I didn't know, but I let it slide. After she went to bed, I cleaned up, and that's when I found it. A crumpled receipt in her coat pocket, fallen out when she tossed it on the chair. Greg's Meats. Dated that afternoon, hours after I'd been there. Odd, I thought. Why'd she go to the butcher? I hadn't asked her to pick anything up. I stood there, holding that slip of paper, the knot in my gut tightening. It was nothing, I told myself. Probably nothing. But I kept the receipt, tucking it into my wallet like a puzzle piece I didn't know how to place yet. The next day, I couldn't shake it. At work, I kept replaying her late nights, her vague answers. I started watching her closer, how she'd linger in the bathroom with her phone, how she'd laugh too loud at nothing when I asked questions. I didn't want to be paranoid, but the cracks were spreading. That night, she said she had a meeting and left again, her purse clutched tight. I waited 10 minutes, then grabbed my keys. I don't know what I expected to find, but I followed her taillights through town, my heart pounding like a drum. She didn't go to any office. She pulled into Greg's lot, the shop dark except for a faint glow in the back. I parked across the street, watching her slip inside. My hands gripped the wheel, my mind racing. What the hell was she doing? I sat in my truck, the engine off, the night pressing in around me. Greg's shop loomed across the street, its neon meets sign flickering faintly, casting a red glow over the empty parking lot. Emily had disappeared through the side door, the one by the alley, like she'd done it 100 times. My breath fogged the windshield, and I realized I was barely breathing, just staring, waiting, trying to make sense of it. Why here? Why now? Greg was just the butcher, a guy I'd known casually for years, always friendly, always loud. But as I sat there, my mind started stitching things together. The receipt, her late nights, that earthy smell on her coat. It didn't add up, not yet, but the pieces were piling up faster than I could ignore. I should have gone in. That's what I kept telling myself. Get out, knock on the door, demand answers. But I didn't. I was frozen, caught between trust and something darker, something I didn't want to name. Minutes dragged into an hour. The back light stayed on, a dim yellow square against the brick wall. I saw shadows move once, maybe twice, but no clear shapes, no proof. My imagination ran wild anyway. Her laughing with him, her hands on him, some secret world I wasn't part of. It made my stomach churn, but I told myself I was overreacting. She could have been picking something up, right? A custom order, a late-night favor. Except the shop had closed at 6. I'd seen the hours on the door. Finally, the door opened. Emily stepped out, her hair mussed, her coat pulled tight around her. Greg followed, towering over her, his apron gone, replaced by a flannel shirt. They didn't touch, didn't linger, just a quick nod, and she headed to her car. He locked up and walked the other way, disappearing down the alley. She drove off and I ducked low as her headlights swept past. My pulse hammered in my ears. I could have followed her home, confronted her then and there, but I didn't. I needed more. I needed to know what I was dealing with before I tore our life apart. The next morning, I played it cool. Pancakes again, the same routine like nothing had happened. She came down, yawning, and thanked me with that same distracted kiss. Late night? I asked, keeping my tone light. She froze for half a second, barely noticeable, but I saw it. Yeah, just work stuff, she said, sipping her coffee. I nodded, watching her over the rim of my mug. Her eyes didn't meet mine. After she left, errands again. I went through her coat. Nothing this time, no receipts, no clues. But the smell was there, faint but unmistakable, like raw meat and something else, something sharp. I couldn't place it, but it stuck with me all day at the shop, gnawing at me while I tightened bolts and listened to the guys' banter. That afternoon, I swung by Greg's again. Not to confront him, just to watch. He was behind the counter, same as always, chopping a slab of pork with a cleaver, grinning at customers. I bought a steak, made small talk. Busy night last night? I asked, casual as I could manage. He didn't flinch, just laughed. Nah, closed up early. Quiet week. Liar, I thought, but I smiled back, paid, and left. The steak sat in my fridge uneaten that night. I couldn't stomach it. By evening, I was a mess. Doubting myself, doubting her, doubting everything. Emily came home late again, humming this time, like she was in a good mood. Good day? I asked, and she nodded, brushing past me to the stairs. I waited till she was asleep, then slipped out to her car. The glove box had a napkin, crumpled, stained with something dark, grease maybe or blood, and under it a key. Not ours, not her office. It was heavy, old, the kind that might unlock a back door somewhere. I held it, my hands shaking, and knew I was close to something I couldn't unsee. Whatever she was hiding, it wasn't just late nights. It was bigger, stranger, and I was going to find it. That key burned a hole in my pocket all night. I didn't sleep. Couldn't, not with Emily breathing softly beside me, oblivious to the storm brewing in my head. I kept seeing her slip into Greg's shop, that nod they shared, the napkin with its dark stain. The key was real, tangible, a weight I couldn't ignore. It wasn't ours. No lock in our house matched its jagged teeth. By morning, I was a wreck, but I hid it behind the usual routine. Coffee, pancakes, a forced smile as she kissed my cheek and left for her day. I waited 10 minutes, then grabbed the key and my jacket. I had to know. Greg's shop was the obvious place to start. I drove there, parked a block away, and watched. Mid-morning, the lot was half full, housewives picking up roasts, old guys grabbing sausage links. Greg was behind the counter, same as yesterday, his cleaver flashing under the fluorescent lights. I didn't go in. Instead, I circled to the alley, where I'd seen Emily disappear. The side door was there, painted gray, unassuming, with a heavy lock that looked older than the building itself. My heart thudded as I pulled the key out. It fit perfectly. The tumblers clicked, and the door swung open into a dim hallway, smelling of cold meat and damp concrete. I stepped inside, ears straining. The shop's hum faded behind me, replaced by a low, rhythmic thudding. Maybe a freezer compressor, maybe something else. The hall led to a stairwell going down, and a door marked storage. I tried the storage room first. Inside, it was what you'd expect. Shelves of canned goods, boxes of spices, a spare apron hanging on a hook. But something felt off. The thudding was louder here, and one shelf was slightly askew, like it had been moved. I pushed it, and it slid, revealing a narrow passage. My gut twisted. This wasn't normal. This wasn't just a butcher shop. The passage opened into a basement room, lit by a single bulb swinging from the ceiling. The air was thick, heavy with that earthy, metallic smell I'd caught on Emily's coat. In the center sat a table. Not a butcher's block, but something makeshift, stained and scratched. Around it were hooks on the walls holding ropes, chains, and costumes? Meat costumes. Slabs of fake flesh stitched into grotesque outfits, like something out of a fever dream. A pig mask with glass eyes stared at me from a corner. My hands shook as I backed out, the key slippery with sweat. Whatever this was, Emily was part of it. I locked up, slid the shelf back, and got out before Greg could notice. Driving home, my mind spun. Costumes, chains, that table. It wasn't just an affair. It was something twisted, something I couldn't wrap my head around. I thought of her late nights, her flushed cheeks, that smell. Was she meeting Greg here in this meat dungeon? The idea made me sick, but it fit too well. When she got home that night, I watched her closer. Every move, every word. She was chatty, almost too cheerful, talking about a client's logo design. I nodded, smiled, but inside I was screaming. After she went to bed, I searched her laptop. Nothing obvious, no emails, no messages, but her browser history was wiped clean. She'd never done that before. The key sat on my nightstand, a silent accusation. I had to confront her, but not yet. I needed proof, something undeniable. The next few days were a blur of pretending. I went to work, fixed cars, laughed with the guys, but it was all mechanical. My mind was elsewhere, piecing together Emily's secret life. I kept the key hidden in my toolbox, checking it every night like it might vanish. I started tailing her again, discreetly, watching her leave the house with that distracted smile. Twice more, she went to Greg's after hours, slipping in through that side door. I didn't follow her inside again, not yet, but I parked nearby, timing her visits. An hour, sometimes two. Greg always left after her, locking up like nothing was wrong. Friday night, I got bolder. She said she had a late meeting, and I let her go, waiting 15 minutes before driving to the shop. The lot was empty, the sign dark, but that back light glowed. I used the key, slipped inside, and crept down to the basement. The room was different this time, lived in. A blanket was tossed over the table, the costumes rearranged. A Polaroid camera sat on a crate, film scattered beside it. I picked one up, my hands trembling. It was Emily, laughing, wearing a cow-spotted apron, her hair wild, Greg's arm around her. Another showed her posing with a fake cleaver, grease paint smeared on her cheeks. They weren't just meeting here. They were playing some sick game, a ritual I couldn't fathom. I heard footsteps above and froze. The shelf creaked. Someone was coming. I shoved the photos in my pocket, ducked behind a stack of boxes, and held my breath. Emily's voice drifted down, soft, teasing. "You're late," she said, and Greg laughed, his boots thumping on the stairs. They stepped into the room, and I peeked through a gap. She was in an apron made of burlap and leather, streaked with red. Paint, I hoped. Greg wore a hog mask, grunting playfully as he chased her around the table. She squealed, darting away, and they collapsed into giggles, oblivious to me. It was bizarre, childish, but the intimacy cut deeper than any kiss could have. This wasn't just betrayal, it was a world they'd built without me. I stayed hidden, watching as they set up the camera, posing with props, ropes, a slab of raw beef, a jar of something dark and sticky. They took turns snapping pictures, their laughter echoing. My chest tightened, rage mixing with nausea. This was what she'd been hiding, some meat-obsessed fantasy. A private circus with Greg as her ringmaster. When they finally left, I waited, then grabbed more photos and a scrap of burlap stained with her perfume. Evidence. Proof. I drove home, my knuckles white on the wheel, and slipped into bed beside her like nothing had changed. She stirred, mumbled something, and I stared at the ceiling, plotting. She'd lied to me, humiliated me, turned our life into a joke. I wasn't just going to end it, I was going to bury them both in it. Saturday, I tested her. "Let's grill tomorrow," I said over breakfast. "Get some steaks from Greg's." Her fork paused midair, and she nodded too quickly. "Sure, sounds good." I smiled, but inside I was boiling. She thought she was safe, that her little game was still secret. She had no idea I'd seen her, that I knew. I spent the day planning. Not just confrontation, but something bigger, something that'd make her feel the weight of what she'd done. Greg too. They wanted to play with meat. I'd give them a taste they'd never forget. I woke up Sunday with a plan. It wasn't enough to call her out. I wanted her to squirm, to feel trapped in her own mess before I pulled the rug out. Revenge isn't just about hurting someone. It's about making them see the hole they've dug. Emily was still asleep, her hair fanned across the pillow, looking innocent as ever. I almost laughed at the disconnect. Her here, soft and familiar, versus the woman in that basement, draped in burlap and giggling with Greg. I made coffee, louder than usual, banging the pot just to wake her. She shuffled in, bleary-eyed, and I grinned. Steak night, right? Let's hit Greg's later. She nodded, sipping her mug. No hint of panic. Good. Let her think she's still in control. We drove to the shop that afternoon, her in the passenger seat, humming to the radio. I kept it light, chatting about work, the weather, normal stuff. Greg was there, of course, behind the counter, his apron smeared with fresh blood from a morning cut. Mark! Emily! He boomed, too cheerful. What's on the menu? I ordered 2 ribeyes, watching his hands as he wrapped them, then added, You got anything special in the back? Something unique. His smile faltered for a split second, and Emily coughed into her sleeve. Just the usual, he said, recovering fast. I paid, thanked him, and we left. In the car, I caught her glancing at me, like she was testing the waters. I didn't bite, not yet. That night, I grilled the steaks, the backyard filling with smoke and the sizzle of fat. Emily sat on the patio, sipping wine, relaxed or pretending to be. I plated the food, and as we ate, I dropped the first hint. Greg's got a weird vibe lately, don't you think? She shrugged, cutting her steak. He's just Greg. I nodded, chewing slowly. Yeah, but that back room, ever wonder what's down there? Her knife slipped, nicking the plate, and she laughed it off. Probably just storage. Why? I let it hang, smiling faintly. No reason, just curious. She changed the subject, but I saw the cracks. Her quick sips of wine, the way her eyes darted away. She was nervous. Perfect. After dinner, I cleaned up while she worked upstairs. I knew she wasn't designing anything. Her laptop was still on the counter, untouched. She was texting, probably warning Greg. Let her. I needed them off balance, tangled in their own lies. Later, I slipped out with an excuse, grabbing beer from the store, and drove to the shop instead. The key still worked, and the basement was empty, but I left a mark. One of their Polaroids, pinned to the table with a butcher's skewer, her face staring up from the cow apron. A warning. When I got back, Emily was in bed, pretending to sleep. I didn't push her. The trap was set. I just had to tighten the noose. Monday, I called in sick and spent the day digging. The photos, the burlap, the key, they were my leverage, but I wanted more. I remembered Greg mentioning a supplier once, some guy who delivered odd cuts. I tracked him down through a buddy at the shop, a wiry dude named Tony who ran a sketchy meat van. Over beers, I pried. Greg ever order anything weird? Tony smirked. Weird how? I pressed, casual-like, and he spilled. Greg had a side gig, custom orders for private parties. Stuff not on the books. He's got a wild streak, Tony said, laughing. Likes his fun messy. I nodded, filing it away. Messy was right, and I'd use it to make their little game a nightmare they couldn't escape. The Polaroid I'd left skewered on that basement table was my first move. A jab to let them know someone was watching. I didn't sleep much that night, imagining Emily sneaking out to check, Greg's meaty hands fumbling as he found it. Monday morning, she was jittery, burning her toast and spilling coffee on the counter. Rough night? I asked, sipping mine, calm as anything. She mumbled something about a headache and bolted upstairs. I smiled into my mug. She was rattled, and I hadn't even started. At the shop, I watched her car peel out, earlier than usual. Good. Let her scramble. I skipped work again, too wired to bother with transmissions or small talk. Instead, I drove to Greg's, parked a street over, and waited. Mid-morning, Emily showed up, darting inside like a thief. Greg followed 10 minutes later, his truck rattling into the lot. I gave them 20 minutes, then slipped in with the key. The basement was a mess. Photos gone, table wiped, costumes shoved into a corner. They'd panicked, tried to clean up, but they'd missed something. A scrap of burlap under the table, snagged on a nail, still smelling of her perfume. I pocketed it, then left another gift. A single word scratched into the table with my pocket knife. Caught. I wanted them sweating, second-guessing every shadow. Back home, I dug deeper. Tony's tip about Greg's private parties stuck with me, so I called around old clients, suppliers, anyone who might know more. Most laughed it off. Greg was quirky, sure, but harmless. Then I hit pay dirt with a guy named Sal, a retired delivery driver who'd worked the route years back. Over the phone, he sounded amused. Greg? Yeah, he's got a thing for theatrics. Used to host these weird gatherings, meat tastings he called them, but it wasn't just eating. Costumes, props, real bizarre stuff. I pressed him, and he chuckled. Heard he roped in a girl once, some artsy type. They'd dress up, play act like it was a butcher's carnival. Freaky, man. My stomach turned. Artsy type. Emily. That night, she came home late again, pale and quiet. Long day? I asked, flipping channels on the couch. She nodded, avoiding my eyes, and mumbled about a deadline. I let her squirm, then tossed out a line. Saw Greg today. Looked stressed. Her head snapped up, just for a second, before she forced a smile. Oh? Probably busy. I grinned back, slow and deliberate. Yeah, probably. She excused herself, and I heard the bathroom door lock, her texting spot. I didn't need to see the messages. I knew she was spiraling, warning Greg, plotting damage control. Let them think they could outrun it. They couldn't. I spent the next hour sketching my next step. Confronting her was too clean, too quick. I wanted them to feel the weight of their little world collapsing, piece by piece. The costumes, the photos, that basement. It wasn't just betrayal. It was mockery, a twisted game they'd played behind my back. I'd turn it against them, make it their cage. I remembered a guy from the shop, Pete, who'd done time for petty theft. He owed me a favor. I called him, kept it vague. Need some gear. Something loud, messy. Can you deliver? He laughed, said he'd hook me up. I didn't tell him why. He didn't ask. The plan was taking shape, and it felt good, cold, sharp, like a blade in my hand. Tuesday, I let Emily think she dodged me. I acted normal. Kissed her goodbye. Went to work. Even texted her a dumb joke about burnt toast. She replied with a laughing emoji, playing along. But I saw the strain in her when she got home. Bags under her eyes, fingers tapping nervously on her glass. Greg must have told her about the table. The word caught. They were scrambling, and I was the ghost they couldn't pin down. Perfect. I kept the pressure subtle, dropping hints over dinner. You ever try those weird meat dishes Greg brags about? Her fork froze mid-bite, and she laughed it off. What, like his sausage? Gross. I nodded, letting it slide, but the seed was planted. After she crashed early, exhausted, she said, I met Pete behind the shop. He rolled up in his beat-up van, grinning like a kid with a secret. Got what you asked for, he said, tossing me a duffel bag. Inside was a mess of gear. Firecrackers, smoke bombs, a couple gallons of pig's blood he'd swiped from a slaughterhouse buddy. You throwing a party or starting a riot? He asked. I smirked. Something like that. He didn't push, just took the cash and peeled out. I stashed the bag in my truck, the weight of it settling my nerves. This wasn't just revenge, it was a reckoning. Wednesday, I baited the trap. Emily said she had another meeting, and I waved her off, casual as ever. Tell Greg hi, I called after her, and she stumbled on the porch step, catching herself with a forced laugh. I waited till her taillights vanished, then drove to the shop. The key got me in, and I set to work in the basement. I rigged the firecrackers under the table. Small pops, nothing lethal, just enough to spook. The smoke bombs went by the stairs, timed to a cheap remote I'd rigged from a car alarm fob. The blood I saved for the walls, splashing it in streaks, letting it drip like a slaughterhouse gone wrong. I hung one of their Polaroids, Emily in her cow apron, smack in the middle, smeared with red. A message, your game's over. I was gone before they arrived, parked across the street with the remote in hand. When Emily's car pulled in, followed by Greg's truck, I waited. They slipped inside, and I pictured their faces, confusion turning to dread as they hit the basement. I pressed the button. Pops echoed faintly, then smoke billowed from the alley door. They stumbled out, coughing, Greg waving his arms like a panicked bear, Emily clutching her coat. I didn't laugh. I just watched, cold and steady, as they scanned the street, eyes wild. They knew it wasn't random. They knew it was me, or someone who'd seen too much. When Emily got home, she was a wreck. Hair tangled, coat streaked with soot. Rough night, I asked, flipping through a magazine. She muttered something about a car backfiring, a spilled drink, and bolted upstairs. I let her stew. The trap was sprung, but it wasn't the end. They'd clean up, regroup, think they could hide again. They were wrong. I had the photos, the burlap, the key, and now the chaos I'd sown. The next step was bigger, uglier, and I was ready to wield it like a hammer. Thursday morning, Emily barely spoke. She shuffled around the kitchen, avoiding my eyes, her hands shaky as she poured coffee. I played dumb, humming as I scrambled eggs, but I saw the cracks, her bitten nails, the way she flinched when her phone buzzed. Greg, probably texting damage control. I didn't need to check. I'd seen enough the night before. Their frantic escape, the smoke curling into the sky. They were rattled, and I was just getting started. You okay? I asked, sliding her a plate. She nodded too fast. Just tired. I smiled, letting it hang. Tired from what, I wondered, but I didn't push. Not yet. At work, I kept my head down, but my mind was on the next move. The firecrackers and blood had been a warning, a shove to knock them off balance. Now I needed to corner them, make them feel the walls closing in. I called Tony again, the meat van guy, and met him at a diner off the highway. Over greasy fries, I leaned in. Greg's parties. Where's he get the props? The costumes? Tony shrugged, chewing. Some theater supply place upstate, I think. Guy's got a hookup. Likes the custom stuff. I nodded, paid the bill, and drove north. 2 hours later, I was at a dingy warehouse, chatting up a clerk who didn't care who I was. For $100, he sold me a crate of leftovers. Pig masks, burlap aprons, fake cleavers. Greg's style down to the stitches. Back home, I stashed the crate in the garage, waiting for dark. Emily was out again. Client stuff, she said, her voice thin. I didn't buy it, but I let her go. Once her car was gone, I loaded the props into my truck and headed to Greg's. The shop was quiet, closed for the night, but I knew they'd be there soon. Hiding, planning, clinging to their little world. I used the key, hauled the crate downstairs, and got to work. I draped the basement in their own madness. Masks on hooks, aprons strung across the table, cleavers scattered like a butcher's tantrum. In the center, I left a note, scrawled in marker. You can't wash this away. Then I poured the rest of Pete's pig blood, gallons of it, over the floor, letting it pool and stink. It wasn't just a mess. It was a mirror, reflecting their twisted game back at them. I was home before Emily, sprawled on the couch with a beer, when she stumbled in. She reeked of smoke, of meat, of fear. Bad day? I asked, voice flat. She nodded, pale as a ghost, and muttered something about a spill at a restaurant. I didn't call her out. I just watched her climb the stairs, her shoulders hunched. She didn't shower. Probably didn't want me hearing her cry. Good. Let her sit with it. Friday, I upped the ante. I printed copies of the Polaroids, her and Greg in their costumes, laughing, posing, and mailed them anonymously to Greg's suppliers, his regulars, even the local paper's tip line. No note, just the images. Let them wonder. Let the whispers spread. By evening, Emily was a shell. Jumpy, quiet, checking her phone every 5 minutes. Greg must have called, freaking out. I cooked again, steaks, rare, the smell filling the house. She barely touched hers, pushing it around her plate. Not hungry? I asked, cutting mine slow and deliberate. She shook her head, eyes glassy. I leaned in, voice low. You know, I heard something weird today. About Greg. People saying he's into some strange stuff. Her fork clattered, and she stood, muttering an excuse. I let her go, savoring the moment. The noose was tightening, and they were choking on it. Soon I'd pull it all the way shut. Friday night, Emily barely slept. I heard her tossing, muttering in her dreams. Greg's name slipped out once, sharp and panicked. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, the Polaroids I'd mailed burning a hole in my mind. By morning, she was a shadow, pale, hollow-eyed, sipping coffee like it was the only thing keeping her upright. I played my part, whistling as I fried bacon, the greasy smell filling the kitchen. "Big plans today?" I asked, casual as ever. She flinched, spilled her mug, and mopped it up with trembling hands. "Just work," she said, barely audible. I nodded, smiling. "Work, sure." I didn't go to the shop. Instead, I drove downtown, parked near the butcher's, and watched. The Polaroids had hit their mark. Greg's lot was quieter than usual. No regulars lingering to chat. A woman I recognized from the neighborhood walked out fast, her face twisted in disgust, clutching a paper bag like it might bite her. Whispers were spreading just as I'd planned. I imagined the photos circulating. Emily in her cow apron, Greg in his hog mask, their little carnival exposed. Not enough to ruin them yet, but enough to make them sweat. I wanted them paranoid, jumping at every glance, every hushed voice. Emily texted me around noon, * running late tonight. Don't wait up. * I grinned at my phone, typed back a cheery no worries, and headed to the garage. The crate from the theater supply was still there, half empty after my last raid on the basement. I pulled out a pig mask, rubbery, grotesque, with stitched lips, and a fake cleaver, its blade dulled but heavy. Props for the next act. I drove to Greg's after dark, the key warm in my pocket. The shop was dead, the alley silent, but that back light glowed. They were inside, I could feel it. I slipped in, quiet as a ghost, and heard voices from the basement. Emily's, tight and shrill, Greg's, low and gruff. "We need to stop," she was saying. "Someone knows." Greg grunted, dismissive. "Just a prank. We're fine." I didn't show myself. Instead, I left the mask and cleaver on the stairs, splashed with more of Pete's blood, dried now, sticky and rank. A silent promise. "I'm closer than you think." I was out before they noticed, parked across the street again, watching. 20 minutes later, Emily burst out, clutching her coat, Greg lumbering after her. She looked wild, scanning the lot like a hunted animal. He grabbed her arm, said something I couldn't hear, and she shook him off, diving into her car. I let her go. Let them fight, fracture. It'd make the end sweeter. When she got home, I was on the couch, beer in hand, the TV droning. She didn't speak, just kicked off her shoes and bolted upstairs. I heard the shower run, long and loud, like she was trying to scrub something away. I didn't ask. I didn't need to. The cracks were spreading, and I was the hammer driving them deeper. Saturday I'd push harder. They thought they could hide, bury their mess. They were wrong. I had one more card to play before the finale, and it'd leave them nowhere to run. Saturday morning, Emily didn't come down for breakfast. I made pancakes anyway, the routine a cruel joke now, and ate alone, the house too quiet. Her phone buzzed upstairs. Over and over. Ignored. I pictured Greg on the other end, frantic, his meaty empire crumbling. The Polaroids had done their work. By noon, I heard it from a buddy at the shop. Greg's name was Mud. Customers were bailing, muttering about weird vibes and sick games. Someone had taped a photo to his shop window overnight, smeared with ketchup, crude, but effective. The paper hadn't run the story yet, but the rumor mill was churning. I'd lit the match. Now the town was fanning the flames. I drove by Greg's around lunch. The lot was empty, the open sign dark. A note on the door read "Closed for inventory," a lie and a bad one. I parked nearby, sipping coffee, and waited. Emily showed up an hour later, her car jerking into the alley. She didn't see me. She slipped inside, and I followed, key in hand, moving slow. The basement was a war zone. Props trashed, table overturned, bloodstains still sticky on the floor. Emily stood in the middle, arms crossed, yelling at Greg. "This is your fault. I told you to stop." He towered over her, red-faced, waving a cleaver. "Not a fake one this time. You loved it. Don't play innocent." I stayed hidden, recording it all on my phone, their voices raw and desperate. They didn't notice the mask I'd left, still dripping on the stairs, or the faint creak as I shifted. Emily stormed out first, Greg slamming the table as she left. I waited till he lumbered upstairs, then moved. I grabbed a jar of that dark, sticky stuff they'd used in their photos, some kind of marinade, sour and thick, and poured it over their costumes, grinding it in with my boot. I left another note. No more games. Then I slipped out, heart pounding, the video safe in my pocket. Evidence, leverage, a knife to twist later. They were breaking, and I was the wedge splitting them apart. Emily got home late, reeking of sweat and that earthy smell I'd come to hate. I didn't ask where she'd been. Just handed her a glass of water, my face blank. "You look rough," I said, and she nodded, gulping it down. "Bad day," she muttered, and vanished upstairs. I let her go, replaying the video in my head. Her voice, shrill and accusing. Greg's, thick with denial. It was gold proof of their unraveling, their guilt. Sunday I'd use it, but not how they'd expect. I wasn't done breaking them yet. I wanted them to taste every ounce of the shame they'd piled on me, magnified tenfold. That night, I dreamed of meat, slabs of it, hanging, dripping, faces carved into the fat. Emily's face, Greg's, mine. I woke up sweating, the plan clearer than ever. They'd built their little world on lies and costumes. I'd bury them in it, make it their tomb. The video was my ace, but I had one more move to set up, a public gut punch they couldn't dodge. They'd feel it soon, and it'd hurt worse than anything they'd imagined. Sunday, I woke early, the house still dark. Emily slept upstairs or pretended to. I didn't care anymore. I'd stopped seeing her as my wife days ago. She was a stranger now, a mask I'd finally peeled off. I brewed coffee, the bitter smell grounding me, and sat at the kitchen table with my phone. The video from the basement played on loop, her shouting, Greg waving that cleaver, their world imploding. I trimmed it, cleaned the audio, and uploaded it to a burner account I'd made on a local forum. No names, just a title, Maple Street Secrets. Let the town connect the dots. By noon, it'd have views, gossip travels fast here. I didn't stop there. I printed more Polaroids. Dozens of them, her in that cow apron, Greg in his hog mask, smeared with grease and glee. I stuffed them into envelopes, no return address, and drove around, dropping them at key spots. The diner, the barbershop, the church parking lot. Places where people talk, where stories spread. I taped one to Greg's shop door, right over his closed sign with a single word in marker. Enjoy. Then I waited, parked a block away, watching the Sunday crowd trickle by. A kid spotted it first, pointing, and soon a small knot of people gathered, whispering, laughing, snapping pics with their phones. The fuse was lit. Emily stayed home all day, locked in her office, probably texting Greg in a panic. I kept busy, mowed the lawn, fixed a leaky faucet, acting like nothing was wrong. Around dusk, my buddy from the shop called, voice tight. "Man, you see what's going around? Greg's place, people saying he's some kind of freak. Photos everywhere." I played dumb. "No kidding? What's Emily think?" He hesitated. "Dunno, man. You okay?" I laughed short and sharp. "Never better." He didn't push, but I heard the doubt. Didn't matter. The town was buzzing, and I was the silent puppeteer. She came down for dinner, looking like she'd seen a ghost. "You hear anything weird today?" she asked, picking at her nails. I shrugged, plating spaghetti. "Like what?" Her eyes darted to her phone, buzzing non-stop on the counter. She didn't answer it. Just rumors. About Greg. I set the table, calm as ice. People talk. Small town. She nodded, but her hands shook as she ate, barely touching the food. I let the silence stretch, heavy and sharp, until she excused herself. I heard her pacing upstairs, whispering into her phone. Greg, no doubt, losing his mind as his customers vanished and his name turned to dirt. By nightfall, the forum post had hundreds of views, comments piling up, some shocked, some mocking, a few calling it a hoax. But the photos were undeniable, and the video sealed it. I saw Greg's truck roar past our house later, headlights cutting through the dark. He didn't stop. Good. Let him run. Let her hide. The public unveiling was just the start. I'd stripped their secret bare, turned their game into a spectacle. But it wasn't enough. They'd humiliated me, carved out a piece of my life for their twisted fun. The final blow was coming, and it'd be personal, messy, and permanent. I slept sound that night, dreaming of their faces. Pale, trapped, staring at the wreckage I'd made. Monday morning, the air felt different. Charged, like the town itself was holding its breath. Emily didn't come downstairs. I heard her moving up there, pacing, her phone a constant hum of notifications she couldn't ignore. The forum post had blown up overnight, thousands of views, screenshots of the Polaroids pinned to every local group, even a grainy still from the video making the rounds. Greg's shop didn't open. A handwritten closed until further notice sign hung crooked on the door, flapping in the wind. I drove by, sipping coffee, and saw a couple teenagers snapping photos, laughing. The whispers had turned to shouts, and I'd fanned the flames just right. At home, I kept the act up, banged around the kitchen, made too much noise, forced her to face me. She slunk down around noon, eyes red, hair a mess. "You're chipper," she muttered, grabbing water. I grinned, flipping a burger on the stove. The smell deliberate, a jab. "Rough weekend." She froze, glass halfway to her lips, then nodded. "Yeah, clients freaking out." I didn't push, just watched her squirm, her lies unraveling in real time. Her phone buzzed again. She silenced it, hands shaky. "Greg okay?" I asked, casual as ever. Her head snapped up, eyes wide for a split second before she forced a shrug. "Dunno. Why?" I smiled, slow and cold. "Just curious." I spent the afternoon fine-tuning the endgame. The public humiliation was sweet, but it was surface level. They could still run, hide, start over somewhere else. I wanted something deeper, something they'd carry forever. Pete came through again, dropped off a package at the shop. No questions asked. Inside was a livestock tagger, the kind farmers used to pierce ears, and a roll of industrial-strength adhesive. Simple tools, but in my hands they'd be brutal. I tested the tagger on an old tire, sharp, clean, permanent. Perfect. The adhesive smelled like tar, thick and unforgiving. I stashed them in my truck, the plan solidifying. Tonight I'd finish it. Emily left around dusk, muttering about fixing things. I let her go, knowing she'd head to Greg's, their last stand. I followed, keeping my distance, and parked a block away. The shop was dark, but her car sat in the alley, Greg's truck beside it. I grabbed the bag, the key, and moved in. The basement was a wreck, props smashed, bloodstains crusting, their panic written in the chaos. Voices drifted up from a back room, low and tense. I crept closer, peering through a cracked door. Emily sat on a crate, head in her hands. Greg paced, meaty fists clenched. "We're done," she whispered. "Everyone knows." He growled, kicking a chair. "We can leave, start over." She shook her head, defeated. I smiled. They wouldn't get the chance. I slipped back, rigged the stairs with the last of the smoke bombs. Quiet now, no pops, just a slow haze to disorient them. Then I waited, tagger and adhesive ready. The final pieces were falling, and I was the gravity pulling them down. They'd built this twisted world. I'd make sure it crushed them. The smoke started curling up, thin at first, then thick enough to sting. I heard coughing, curses, Greg's voice, barking. "What now?" Emily whimpered, footsteps shuffling. I pulled a bandana over my face, stepped into the haze, and moved fast. The back room door was half open. I kicked it wide, the tagger in one hand, adhesive in the other. Greg spun, eyes wild, but the smoke blinded him. He swung a fist and missed. I drove the tagger into his shoulder, hard, piercing skin and muscle. He roared, stumbling, and I squeezed the adhesive over the wound, gluing the metal tag in place. A livestock number, for 187, now part of him. "You're marked," I said, voice low, unrecognizable through the cloth. Emily screamed, backing into a corner, but I was on her before she could run. The tagger bit her earlobe, a quick snap, and she yelped, clutching it as blood trickled. I smeared adhesive over it, locking the tag tight. 486, her number. Matching set, I growled, stepping back. The smoke thickened, their gasps turning to chokes. Greg lunged again, blind and furious, but I sidestepped, letting him crash into the crate. Emily just stood there, frozen, tears cutting tracks through the grime on her face. I didn't linger, tossed the gear aside, grabbed a Polaroid from my pocket, and dropped it at her feet, her in her apron, laughing. "Remember this?" I said, then bolted up the stairs, the smoke a wall behind me. Outside, I sucked in clean air, ears ringing. Their shouts faded, swallowed by the haze. I drove home, hands steady now, the weight lifting. They'd live hurt, humiliated, but alive. The tags weren't fatal, just permanent, a brand they couldn't cut away without scars. The adhesive would hold for weeks, maybe months, long enough for the town to see, to point, to laugh. I'd marked them like the animals they'd played at being, turned their game into a public cage. When I got back, the house was empty. Emily hadn't returned. Didn't matter. She'd find me eventually, or she wouldn't. I was done waiting. I cracked a beer, sat on the couch, and let the quiet settle. The forum was still buzzing. New posts about Greg's shop. Wild theories about the meat freaks. Someone had seen them stumble out, tagged and bloody, and the photos were already up. I didn't check. Didn't need to. The reckoning had struck, swift and sharp, and they'd feel it every time they looked in a mirror. I'd taken their secret, their joy, and made it a chain around their necks. Revenge wasn't loud, it was cold, deliberate, and mine. Tuesday dawned gray and still. Emily didn't come home that night, and I didn't call. The house felt lighter without her. Empty, sure, but clean, like I'd scrubbed out a stain. I went to work, the shop buzzing with gossip. Heard Greg skip town, one of the guys said, wrench in hand. Some lady saw him at the gas station, ear all messed up, yelling about moving west. I nodded, tightening a bolt. Ha, weird. They didn't mention Emily, and I didn't ask. Didn't need to. She'd surfaced somewhere, tagged and broken. Her artsy life a punchline now. By afternoon, the paper ran a small blurb. Asterisk local butcher closes amid strange rumors asterisk. No names, just enough to keep the whispers alive. The forum had slowed, but the photos lingered, pinned to every corner of the internet. I saw one at the diner later. Greg, tag gleaming on his shoulder, face twisted in a snarl. Emily's wasn't there. Maybe she'd hidden, maybe she'd cut it off and left a scar. Either way, they were gone from Maple Street, from me. I ate my burger slow, the meat juicy and warm, and felt satisfied. Not happy, not yet, but steady. Days turned to weeks. The shop stayed shuttered, the sign fading in the rain. Emily's stuff sat in boxes in the garage. I didn't touch it, didn't care. A lawyer called once, her voice on the line, asking about divorce papers. I said send 'em. Hung up, and that was that. I kept the key to Greg's basement, a memento, locked in my toolbox. Sometimes I'd hold it, feel its weight, and remember. The smoke, the tags, their faces when the world they'd built turned to ash. I started cooking again, just for me. Steaks, burgers, pancakes on Sundays. The rhythm was mine now, no cracks, no lies. The town moved on, the story fading to a local legend. A cautionary tale kids would twist into campfire spookiness. I didn't mind. I'd burned their game to the ground, left them branded and scattered, and walked away whole. Revenge wasn't about winning, it was about carving your name deeper than theirs. And I had. The ashes settled, and I was still standing.